stand on the threshold of a global energy transformation in the race to net zero. We are witnessing rapid advancements in small modular reactors and microreactor technologies that hold the potential to revolutionize the way we produce and consume energy. These technologies promise to provide safe, scalable, and flexible energy solutions for both electric and non-electric applications, positioning them as a crucial piece of the puzzle in our journey to a net zero future. Today's panel is a unique opportunity for us to explore the opportunities, the challenges, the pathways for these emerging technologies. We'll dive into key themes such as modularity, cost effectiveness, equity, and versatility, as well as the critical challenges that remain. Challenges including licensing, safeguards, workforce development, and regulatory frameworks. Before we begin our discussion, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Scott Shroom, Director of Security at the National Nuclear Security Administration in the United States. Scott, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you for the introduction, Christine, and also for inviting me to speak. It's an honor and a privilege to be here, and it was a pleasure to meet all the panelists this evening. So my name is Scott Shroom. I am the Director of the Office of International Nuclear Security, which is part of the Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration, and we do a lot of outreach with international partners across the globe on reducing risks of nuclear material theft and sabotage of nuclear installations. Governments around the world are considering expanded use of nuclear energy to address concerns with energy security and climate change. And small modular reactors and microreactors offer potentially transformative opportunities in meeting those goals. Given the accelerating demand for sustainable, reliable energy and the pressing need to achieve net zero emissions by mid-century, this panel and discussion are particularly timely. We applaud the IAEA for organizing this SMR conference, as well as initiatives such as Director General Grossi's Atoms for Net Zero that help raise awareness of the critical links between nuclear security and nuclear energy. NNSA, the National Nuclear Security Administration, recognizes the promise of these new technologies, but is also cognizant that SMRs and microreactors pose unique challenges to the security and non-proliferation regimes. My office engages with over 60 countries across the globe, as well as U.S. domestic industry, to better understand the security implications of these new technologies. We have invested a lot of time and effort into analyzing issues such as physical protection, cybersecurity, and insider threat mitigation, as well as the critical nexus between safety and security. Ensuring safe and secure deployment across borders, industries, and sectors requires rethinking of or revisiting how we license, regulate, secure, and safeguard nuclear technologies. In particular, security must be an integral part of that conversation. And again, my office is working domestically, bilaterally, and through the IAEA to raise awareness of the importance of security by design. We are also working very closely with counterparts in safeguards and safety to understand those links. Every stakeholder, from the designer, the vendor, the operator, and regulator, has a critical role to play. And this is an area where embarking and expanding countries have an opportunity to lead the way. Existing regulatory paradigms globally were constructed mostly for the large light water reactors, but we need to think critically about the potential risks when it comes to reactors with novel fuel types, higher enrichments, and how to protect smaller decentralized facilities. Security by design ensures that these vulnerabilities are addressed proactively with built-in measures that can scale with deployment, while hopefully reducing the regulatory burden on the recipient country without hindering performance or accessibility. This concept of security by design is particularly essential as we address the broader challenges of licensing and regulatory frameworks. Achieving these goals are not just a matter of policy and technology, but also workforce development. The future of SMRs and microreactors depends on the talent, creativity, and leadership of young engineers, policymakers, and nuclear professionals from every corner of the globe. NNSA is pleased to be part of this event as the next generation of security professionals will play a significant role in developing and securing these new nuclear facilities. We believe that success will hinge on multi-generational collaboration to innovate within existing regulatory frameworks, shape new ones, and foster inclusive global cooperation so that nuclear energy is accessible and secure for all. At the same time, we must balance innovation and responsibility and urgency with a deliberative approach to build a sustainable and secure energy future. So again, it's a pleasure to be here this evening, and I wish you all a very interesting discussion. And again, we're really happy to be part of this effort and look forward to hearing the panelists. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Scott, for those insightful remarks. So now we're going to transition into our panel discussion. Today we're excited to have 6 seasoned and young professionals here with us from across the globe with perspectives on operations, finance, security, and policy. So I'll start introducing them from my right to my left. First we have Jacob Zakobi, who is the licensing lead at GE Hitachi Nuclear Energy. We also have Khalid Kasadnik, who is the commissioner of the Jordan Atomic Energy Commission. We have Festus Kwanzaa, who is a financial analyst at the Ghana Atomic Energy Commission. We have Maddie Cohen, who's a research associate at EFI Foundation. We also have Jeremy Whitlock, who's a senior technical advisor in the IAEA Department of Safeguards. And we also have Angela Abadi Zapata, who is a security inspector and evaluator in the Colombian Ministry of Energy and Mines. So thank you all for joining us. So to get started, Khalid, Festus, and Jacob, as you explore the potential of SMRs and microreactors in your respective countries, whether for desalination, addressing desalination needs in Jordan, or addressing Ghana and Poland's growing energy needs, what are specific regional and local factors that influence these decisions? And so maybe we'll start with you, Jacob.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Christine, for inviting me to this panel. I'm glad to sit next to all of you to discuss those topics, and thank you, everyone, for listening to this debate. I'm Jakub. I'm coming from Poland. I'm representing GE Hitachi Nuclear Energy, so a vendor perspective. I'm working since the beginning of my career as a licensing engineer, and I want to share with you what I think, what the company represents, and what is needed as well in Poland. So first of all, GE Hitachi is part of GE Vernova, so we are proposing to deliver clean energy solutions for our customers around the globe. We provide renewable solutions, we provide grid solutions, we provide nuclear solutions by GE Hitachi. And GE Hitachi is developing the BWX-300 reactor together with our customers and our partners around the globe in United States, Canada, Poland. In those countries, we have organizations, OPG in Canada, TVA in the United States, OSGE in Poland, which agreed to collaborate to develop the standard design for our SMR. We developed this technology because each of the countries, each of the companies require clean solutions to deliver energy for their customers. In Poland, we have a grid that is most relying on coal energy. Thus, we are transitioning from coal to nuclear. The sizing of the coal blocks today is in 200, 600 megawatt electric range. So the BWX-300 with 300 megawatt electric output perfectly fits to the Polish energy grid. That allows us to transition, but that also gives us some risks and some challenges, but also opportunities, which relate to the fact that we are not, Poland is not a nuclear country. So we will have to face those topics, and we'll have to develop the nuclear industry fast if we want to deploy those things quickly. Thank you.
Heller?
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to give a different point of view, like from Jacob, because I'm representing the Jordan Atomic Energy Commission, which is the NPO of Jordan. So we are trying to promote the nuclear energy, introduce the nuclear power to our electricity grid. So we have, like in Jordan, we have two main drivers for like introducing nuclear energy. The first one is energy security, mainly that we need to secure our energy of supply. So we are we are from the Middle East, a Middle Eastern country, but without no oil and gas industry. So we mainly rely on the imports of our primary energy resources. So we need to diversify to have more security of supply. And the other reason is like for water desalination, that we also like we have limited surface water, freshwater resources, and desalination is the only way to fulfill our water demand. So this is part of the energy water security. The other part, as Jacob has mentioned, that it's mainly like environmental issues and reduction of the emissions. So all around, like during the life of the nuclear power program in Jordan, that firstly we have introduced, we start thinking of large nuclear power reactors, because at the time that we had in the market was available only like large MPPs. So we had some some technical infrastructure studies, such as cooling water studies, siting studies, transportation of the heaviest equipment studies, like all related for this citing issues for large MPPs, and also some macroeconomics studies, and it was concluded that for Jordan that large MPP is basically too big. So we have a small grid, we don't have enough, or we don't have abundant cooling water to cool those like big facilities, big reactors, and also for the investment, like we have limited financial resources that we really need to go for like a smaller investments. So this is like the starting point for our SMR project, and based on this, like we are working for SMRs. To answer your questions, there's limitations, financial and technical. So I try to summarize. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Festus?
Thank you very much. Thank you to the IAEA for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here because I think it's really opportune. Ghana currently is pursuing a nuclear power program, and we find ourselves in the second phase of the milestones approach. So learning about SMRs is very, very opportune for us because we've done a lot of studies in the area of large reactors. So it's like a point of inflection where we transition and moving forward with the emergence of SMRs. So in relation to the question, there are several factors really that is driving Ghana in the direction of adopting nuclear power, and specifically the factors that could potentially influence our choice for an SMR reactor. The first that I would state will be our relatively smaller grid size. We think that gives us flexibility to make a decision on SMRs, because there wouldn't be the need to expand substantially. So that's one factor that could drive us in the direction of SMRs. Another factor really is the geography generally of Ghana. So if you look at the location of Ghana, it's in West Africa, on the Atlantic coast. So the topography is favorable, the seismic conditions are favorable, the seismic conditions are favorable, the topography is favorable. We have abundant water supply on the coast that could help cooling. So generally, the geography of Ghana is also, favorable for deployment of SMRs. And finally, our economic development plan. We think that we are at a phase of our development where really industrialization is a critical part of our economic development strategy. So deployment of SMRs will be opportune to co-locate SMRs with industries and industrial parks. The government has a policy of actually siting an industry in each district of the country. And so deployment of SMRs will really support this kind of industrialization path moving forward. So these are three critical factors that's driving the decision to potentially deploy SMRs moving forward.
Thank you so much. So one of the key advantages of SMRs and microreactors is their modularity. which allows for the deployment in diverse environments from remote regions to urban centers. And I think the panelists so far have touched a bit upon this. So Jeremy, from your role in the IAEA, how do you see safeguards by design being integrated into modular designs, specifically in remote or less developed areas?
Yes, so absolutely, we need to change the way we approach remotely located microreactors operating in possibly large fleets as well. What won't change are the objectives of the IAEA Department of Safeguards. That we will need to apply the same level of confidence measures. We just don't necessarily want to send human beings doing inspections at all of these remote facilities the way we do it today. So we can actually divide it up into two sides of the question. One is the delivery of these small units to these remote areas, because we can do some of the work before it even ships out from the supplier country. And then what happens when it's in the remote area. So if you look at the supplier country, we will need to go and verify the design of the technology before it's sealed up. These are largely going to be sealed units that arrive. Maybe they arrive fueled, but maybe they arrive ready to receive fuel. But in any case, the unit itself is pre-built, and the package arrives and in plug-and-play sort of thing. The Department of Safeguards needs to verify the design itself, and the reason is because we need to know that the facility is not being misused. And one of the ways you know that it's not being misused is that number one, it's producing the level of energy it's supposed to be producing, whether it's heat or electricity, and number two, the design is as they said it was designed. And so today we go to a construction site and we watch the construction of a facility. For these units, we will have to go to a third-party country, most likely, and visit a factory. And so that's one thing that we'll have to do, which is different. And when we verify the design, maybe it's multiple visits, maybe it's in a country under a different safeguards agreement from the customer country. So this is completely new. We'll probably then apply a safeguard seal to the design. So in addition to everything else that's done to this package to prepare it for shipping, whether or not there's fuel inside it, so even if it's not fueled, we likely will have to apply some safeguard seal, which then rides with the reactor to the customer country. And this is new, because that's normally we just start the safeguards when the technology is built at the site and the fuel is received. When it's installed, we will not want to be sending inspectors to these remote spots. There's resource issues with doing that. The very small reactors are going to have very small amounts of fissile material. There's cost-benefit issues here, but we still have to meet our safeguards objectives. But you can meet the safeguards objectives in much smarter ways today. So you can do this by having technology doing the monitoring for you. We call this unintended monitoring systems. So the rest of the nuclear industry knows these things as Geiger counters and neutron detectors that reside at the facility and do the monitoring for us. And even better, transmit the information to Vienna. So unintended monitoring systems and remote data transmission. We do this today in about 10% of our facilities on the planet. We need to do it for sure with these types of facilities. And by the way, the remote data transmission is done through secure VPN internet connections. And in some of these remote spots, you do not have that. And so there is an infrastructure issue way above the level of the technology designer themselves. The country needs to have good internet in these areas. And it's not just the developing countries. I come from Canada. We want to put microreactors in the north of Canada to where we currently have diesel generators burning 24/7, keeping the place warm and powered. And this can be done much better with nuclear technology. And we should be monitoring remotely the nuclear technology for security and maybe even operation, to have sort of a centralized control center and safeguard. So there's a synergy there with the 3 S's as well. And whatever the other 2 S's come up with to enable that, we can probably ride on that as well.
Thank you so much. So Jacob, as you work to deploy the BWRX 300 in Poland, what challenges and opportunities do you see in ensuring that SMRs can be deployed effectively in both urban and rural settings?
Thank you for the question. So as a technology provider, we cannot assume that every unit will be deployed at a coastal location. We have to keep in mind that all the elements must be transportable wherever it is close to the open waters, or it must be inland. So the transportability of elements is crucial to have that deeply enrooted in the design phase, and this is what we are doing to plan for the modularity, so the middle part of the SMR phase, to keep in mind that we want to deliver things where we need to deliver. So modularity is not something new in the nuclear business, but it's crucial if you want to deploy things fast, on time, on budget. And modularity is present with the main equipment, it's present with the civil parts. Not everything is possible to make modular, some things you have to make on site, but if you think about it early, then you can make the tight schedule real. And this is important if you have a tight schedule. This is what we are doing in Canada. The deployment phase is planned very early, and as we see, those things are deep in the design. In Poland, when we want to build reactors, our partner OSGE, so Orlen Synthos Green Energy, they don't want to build one reactor, they want to build multiple reactors, up to 24 reactors. They have a governmental approval to 6 locations, up to 24 reactors. And when you think about modularity, you can have a manufacturer that makes a specific pressure line, INC equipment, valves, they just make it in series. Making that in series helps in eliminating the first-of-a-kind issues with the development, the construction, the manufacturing, the transportation, and assembling. So if you want to build a lot, you need to have the modular construction in mind. And I think this is actually considered. When you look on the Polish industry, the Polish nuclear industry, we might not have enough experience there. We are involved in some projects internationally, but if you want to build a lot, there is an opportunity for non-nuclear businesses to start being nuclear. And there is a lot of companies that are interested in going nuclear. They just need to know how they can be interested.
Thank you. So what I've heard so far is that international collaboration is really important, and also having these discussions early on. And so as we look to deploy these microreactors and SMRs at scale, international standards and regulatory frameworks are crucial. Angela, from your perspective, what security considerations should be integrated into these reactors to maintain both public confidence as well as security and safety?
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. I start by thanking to the agency for this invitation, and of course to mention that it's an honor for me to chair this panel with these colleagues and experts. So to answer the question, I will divide the answer in 2 parts. First, I will talk about, for me, and my personal opinion, are the technical aspects of nuclear security that Colombia must develop. And in the second part, I will talk about how the Ministry of Mines and Energy is working in those aspects. So, as I told you before, in my personal opinion, the aspects that Colombia must have are a robust regulation, an emergency plan response, the planification against threats, and for me, one of the most important aspects is involve the society in this process. And how we are working in the Ministry of Mines and Energy. So in this moment, we are working on an investment project, and the objective that investment project is try to develop a public policy to improve access to advanced nuclear technology. But be clear, when we talk about advanced nuclear technology, that include the use of SMRs. Okay, so through this investment project, we are trying to work in these aspects that I mentioned before. For example, having a robust regulation. So today we have updated our national regulatory framework, including a nuclear regulation. And this nuclear regulation is according with the international recommendation. For the emergency response plans, we are working with governmental entities and at the national level, and the idea is to review this advanced nuclear technology. We are working in enough document, and we hope to have the draft for the next year. With respect to again, the planification against the threat, we are working in our DVD, and this is a very important topic. So the Ministry of Mines and Energy is working with the Ministry of Defense, and we started the whole process to declaration of the threats. And finally, to try to involve the society, we are doing a consultancy. And the objective of this consultancy is carry out an analysis to identify the technical, social, and economic impacts associated with the use of these technologies. And one of the products that we expect to have is one document containing different strategies to communicate the benefits of the use of the SMRs. So as you can see, we are doing our homework.
I think it's a really powerful message that you're integrating social, economic, and regulatory aspects through one framework. And so, you know, oftentimes we really focus the discussions on the safety and the security aspects. And so it's, I would say, enlightening to see that the social and the economic aspects are also being considered. And so my next question actually is to Jeremy, because safeguards often tends to also maybe not be as prominent within these regulations as maybe we would like them to be at the IAEA. So could you talk a little bit about the key challenges that we're observing in harmonizing safeguards obligations across borders to ensure a secure global deployment of SMRs?
Yeah, and I didn't thank you before, but thank you for inviting me to this session. It's a pleasure to be here. We often talk about 3S, the 3S approach, safety, security, and safeguards, but what we don't make clear by just saying 3S is that two of those S's are national obligations, and one of them is safeguards, and it's the international obligation. So when we talk about harmonizing or integrating or making sure we are not compromising one by implementing the requirements of the other, we're actually talking about the customer country having its own set of national requirements, and safety and security are just two of them. There's a bunch of other stuff as well, all the legal requirements of the facility. And on top of that, where we are bringing in safeguards, and traditionally it was just brought in on top of that after the fact and imposed, and a lot of retrofitting happened of cameras and seals, and away we went. Now we're talking about integrating the process of design with safeguards itself, and because it's a necessity, because you might have to have an instrument which is actually integral to the operation of the facility itself. And when it's integral, so imagine a detector which is strapped to the side of a pipe, or it's a probe on the side of a container, and maybe it's transmitting to Vienna, so it's transmitting without causing any cybersecurity issues, without tripping the reactor. There's safety issues there, there's security issues there. So we need to make sure these interfaces don't cause any compromises with safety and security. And that is another reason to be starting early and talking at the IAEA. Now the good news is that the safeguards requirements in customer countries do not change that much, because most of the countries that these plants will be built in are under comprehensive safeguards agreements, and they follow a template, and there are slight changes and slight implementation changes, so maybe the frequency of inspections is different, the intensity of inspections, but the concepts are the same. The national requirements for safety and security are largely based on, in many cases, the IAEA standards, and so that also doesn't change a lot in terms of concepts. And so there is a conversation that will be very fruitful and that can be held in advance at the IAEA. And at the same time as harmonizing the these requirements from a design point of view, we also have to look to our partner at the customer state, the various different customer states, or member states. I call them customer states because I'm pitching it as from the vendor lens, perhaps. They are going to be under similar safeguards agreements, but they may or may not have a strong safeguards authority in place. They may have almost no safeguards authority in place if they're a developing country that to date doesn't have much nuclear material. And so the responsibilities of the state today may be vastly different from what they will be when there's a reactor now operating on the site, regardless of who owns and operates the reactor. It could be owned and operated by a third-party country, for example. It could be floated in by a third-party country and be operated in the port. And the fuel may never actually leave the floating barge, and it may just disappear and go back to the host country and then be replaced. But while it's operating in the country, it's under the safeguards agreement of that country. And that country needs to have a strong, robust safeguards authority. So the agency does have resources to capacity build in newcomer states so that there is that strong safeguards authority, which is largely an office within the state nuclear regulator, so that it's stepped up accordingly and in time for timely deployment.
Thank you so much. And beyond the IAEA, there's also other critical organizations like the EFI Foundation, where Maddie works, that's also helping to address capacity building in newcomer states. So Maddie, could you share how the Nuclear Scaling Initiative is supporting the creation of a regulatory environment that allows for the rapid deployment of SMRs and microreactors, while also maintaining this robust safety, security, safeguards framework?
Yes, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. It is such an honor to be here. My name is Madeline Cohen, and I'm a research associate at EFI Foundation. EFI Foundation is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization in Washington, D.C. We conduct research and analysis on a variety of decarbonization technologies to accelerate the clean energy transition. Like many organizations and companies present here today, our research indicates that nuclear energy can play a major role in meeting many global objectives. 25 countries also recognize this at COP28 with the Tripling Nuclear Energy Declaration. But what does tripling nuclear energy actually mean? This is building 50 gigawatts of new nuclear per year, every year, until 2050. This is a drastically different picture than the current ecosystem we have today. In recognition of this challenge, EFI Foundation, Clean Air Task Force, and the Nuclear Threat Initiative, so a set of nonprofits, have launched the Nuclear Scaling Initiative through research, or NSI, through research and analysis, coalition and capacity building, and commercial convening. NSI hopes to help build the new nuclear ecosystem that can enable the safe, secure scale-up of nuclear energy. To your question, the transformation of the regulatory environment is, of course, critical for scaling, and there are a few key challenges, well, many, but a few key challenges. Number one, you have the existing regulatory frameworks that are largely built around the technologies that countries are familiar with, so transferring the guidance, the regulations, the human resources to these new SMRs is a huge lift. You also have the early harmonization efforts that are challenged by the different approaches to meeting shared safety standards. And of course, with the long-term intention of international harmonization, there is this risk that that may not happen. Countries may not want to give up their sovereignty, and developers will have to undergo redundant design reviews. That said, I think at this conference, the early readouts from the joint licensing and joint early review collaborations in Europe, the US, Canada, and UK have been really encouraging, and not only in terms of fostering efficiencies, but also for improving nuclear safety and maintaining the high safety standards we have today. In addition, I do think that government support for first-of-a-kind licensing reviews is essential. Getting the first-of-a-kind SMR review over that kind of large regulatory hurdle at the onset is a huge challenge. And lastly, I think in terms of longer term, we would like to, or we're exploring the use of an international technical support organization as potentially a way to provide additional licensing support for embarking countries. To the second part of your question, scaling, of course, requires safe and secure nuclear energy. NSI hopes to integrate non-proliferation, safeguards, and security into commercial projects from concept to deployment. As demonstrated by the UAE in their Baraka build, the path to fast, smooth, and successful nuclear deployment lies in the selection of proliferation-resistant technologies and international best practices for safeguards and security. So NSI hopes to encourage governments and customers to consider this as early as possible.
Thank you so much. And Jacob, I'd like to kind of bring the question around to you as a vendor. You know, what have been the regulatory challenges that you faced, and maybe what could you share maybe a few lessons learned with the community here today that we can potentially take home and consider as we look to deploy maybe micro or small modular reactors in our countries?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So, GE Hitachi is very experienced in case of regulating developing technologies under the US NRC rigor. And this is going back, decades back, to the very first days of nuclear energy. And there's, not me of course, but many people that learned how to do it, and we maintained the knowledge that we can use today. In the past decade, we have licensed and large reactor, ESBWR, which has some features that we use in the current SMR BWRX-300. We leverage the knowledge and the expertise, the research and development that we had to do for the previous reactor in current licensing efforts. This information is helpful not only to deploy the reactor in United States, it helps us in the development phase as well in Canada, where we are in the middle of the licensing process for the OPG project, Ontario Project Generation Company in Canada, and we are expecting that the LTC, so the license to construct, will be soon granted. The information shall be in the next months. Now, we developed the BWRX-300 with our partners not only in the United States and Canada, but as well as Poland, and we are participating in a Great British Nuclear Project in which we are one of the 4 companies taken into account to develop the SMRs in the country. The Canadian regulatory body, the CNSC, US NRC, and ONR are together collaborating on understanding our design to make the licensing process much faster and understand if the concept of the plant is safe and ready to deploy. This collaboration helps companies like GE Hitachi and those I mentioned earlier as our partners to make greater assurance that we can deploy those plants when we are required to deploy those plants. So for the markets in which I said we are doing the review, so in US, Canada, UK, we have lessons learned that are useful for countries like Poland that we can share, and the regulatory bodies can together discuss, learn, and find out what topics need more attention than the others, and maybe help the review of the consequent plans that we develop and we deploy in other countries.
Thank you. And so I kind of want to circle back to something that Khalid and Festus shared earlier, which was around how SMRs have really opened up an opportunity for nuclear energy to be considered in their countries from a financial perspective. And so within the context of some of the financial discussions that I've listened to, financial risk sharing always is a central point of discussion. And so, Maddie, could you share how the Nuclear Scaling Initiative is working to promote nuclear risk sharing, and how this can address barriers to scaling SMRs and microreactors and making them more accessible and equitable?
Absolutely. So to create a global nuclear ecosystem for scaling, projects need to be bankable, easier to license, and faster to deliver. When thinking about the barriers to kind of deploying these first projects, one of the key cross-cutting financial barriers is what we call the first mover disadvantage, or the immense, difficult to measure risks associated with the first SMR build. That said, the SMR business case isn't really demonstrated with one singular SMR build. Rather, the supply chain build-out, licensing certainty, and cost reductions are to be demonstrated over a set of identical SMRs or an order book. To share the high costs and high risks associated with an order book, you likely need some sort of demand aggregation or a consortium of buyers. And so by having this consortium of buyers, you essentially have this order book in which they're sharing the key risks. Importantly, having the order book shared, the buyers are actually purchasing the units at an average cost as opposed to this first of a kind cost. To catalyze order book formation, we're also exploring the use of tiered risk sharing mechanisms that could potentially be backstopped by a public financial mechanism. So in the case of the United States, an order book could be backstopped by a loan from the Loan Programs Office. There are also other ways that we've discussed in terms of containing cost. You could do an integrated project delivery model, which utilizes construction best practices. You can use the same workforce and the same site for across different SMR order books, and then also having the complete design at the onset of construction. Of course, this financial backstop may not be applicable in all countries or locations, and so in this case, we're also exploring ways in which international institutions can play a role. I think multilateral development and infrastructure banks could potentially provide a pathway, but of course there will need to be policy changes. But in the near term, there definitely could be some capacity building efforts to start to build this know-how.
Thank you so much. In Festus, in Ghana, where you're working on the country's first SMR, what financial mechanisms or risk-sharing mechanisms are you exploring to make this project viable?
Yes, so in Ghana, on our nuclear power program, we really identify financing and risk management as a very critical component. And as a financial analyst, I'm very happy that we are mainstreaming this conversation, because a lot of the times we discuss all the infrastructure issues, and the next question really that gets the project going is, how do we get the money? How do we manage the risks? So it's been very important to us right from the outset, thinking about how we finance our project and how we manage risks. And clearly, right from the outset, we formed a nuclear power finance group at the national level that I was privileged to coordinate, where we conducted a lot of technical research, to contextualize financing and risk management at the national level. So we're able to produce a lot of technical research on financing options and strategies to finance our nuclear power project, financing back-end liabilities. We're able to conduct a macroeconomic impact study to analyze the overall impact of nuclear power on the Ghanaian economy. We're able to also conduct a technical research on risk management from a broad project management perspective. So we are really guided. We have a broad framework that actually guides us to manage risks moving on. We've been able to identify several risks, assess these risks to know their impact and probability of occurrence, in a risk matrix format. We've also been able to do a stakeholder mapping to be able to know which stakeholders can manage these risks or are best positioned to manage these risks in terms of being economically positioned or technically positioned to assess these risks. So in terms of the risk sharing strategies that we've identified, First, we can talk about power purchase agreement. We've also identified put-call options agreement. We've also identified hedging instruments, especially when we talk about managing foreign exchange risks and other financial risks. We've also identified partial risk guarantees and credit risk enhancement strategies. There are also innovative approaches that are being used in other jurisdictions, like contract for differences and the regulated asset-based model. So moving forward in relation to SMRs, what we really need to do is to contextualize and really assess these risk-sharing mechanisms in a way that fits our context and in a way that makes it applicable to manage risks in our country.
Thank you so much. And Khalid, maybe you also want to add some context in terms of financial perspectives coming from Jordan?
Yeah, sure. So I don't want to repeat what my colleagues have mentioned, but so first, like in Jordan at least, like what we are targeting is like to be nth of a kind, not first of a kind. So we are not like really able to host the first of a kind. And this is mainly that we are not able or not we are not willing to accept the technical risk of this design. So first of all, like if it's not first of a kind, it's nth of a kind. So okay, so this technical risk is already this design is already proven or already working. So a significant amount of the risk will be reduced on us as end users. So however, the other kind of risks that is associated with nth of a kind is not maybe safety related, but it's mainly related for the business model of this SMR technology, whether it's transportable, whether it's modular, whether it's scalable, like those the key factors that's really quite promoted by the vendors. So this kind of the risk that we are willing to take, not technical risk, that's really one important thing. So then after that, once those non-technical risks will be identified, which may be related for the business model, that we can work with our local public partners. Like what we are targeting is like public-private partnership for our model, especially that is SMRs. They have like smaller capital investments that we can like target our like private sectors that to be engaged on those kind of activities, and there will be like and at some some point that those like public private sectors could be also the end users for this electricity or this energy that we are using. So yeah, so mainly that like so mainly like not a technical risk. We are willing to take the business model risk, and we will work with our local partners, private partners to have to secure some financing for this project.
Thank you. And so kind of going back to this concept of just and equitable energy transition, SMRs, as we heard earlier, are really providing a bridge between enabling countries to pursue nuclear energy. So Angela, how is Colombia integrating the concept of equitable energy access into its plans for SMR deployment?
Okay, thank you for the question. So to answer the question, it is important to mention that in this moment, the Ministry of Mines and Energy has established an energy community policy. And the objective of this policy is to ensure that the community have access to clean, safe, and available energy. With that in mind, and on the other hand, we need to understand that in Colombia, the document containing guidelines for the energy transition policy in Colombia is called COMPES 4075, COMPES. It's in Spanish, and in this document is mentioned that Colombia lays studies regarding with the use of the nuclear technologies and the advanced nuclear technology. So, as I mentioned before, we are working in an investment project, and remember that I say that the objective of this project is develop a nuclear policy. And we are trying to do that nuclear policy according with the energy community policy. For what? Because we want to be sure that the communities have access at this type of advanced nuclear technology.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And Maddie, could you maybe elaborate a bit more on Angela's response in terms of, from your perspective, how can SMRs serve underrepresented communities, and what steps can we take to ensure that these technologies remain affordable and inclusive for all?
Yes, thank you for the question. So I think economic development, emissions mitigation, and energy access are all interconnected issues that should be addressed comprehensively. For example, the IEA's model for global electricity demand is expected to triple by 2050. But this may not fully account for the current gap in global energy access and a potential increase in global electricity demand, especially in areas in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. And when you think about those areas, not only do they need access to clean and firm electricity and heat, but they're also looking for opportunities to attract industry and different economic development opportunities. And as Diana mentioned at the Win Lunch yesterday, which was excellent, so thank you to the organizers, this kind of access can also be life-changing for women. And then when you look at developing economies that are transitioning away from coal, these communities are also looking for new economic opportunities and development for their area. And so SMRs, there are a number of characteristics which kind of fit all of these pieces together. Its smaller size and enhanced safety allows for location in remote or urban areas. Again, as many of the panelists have mentioned, the smaller size also lowers the total upfront investment, and the potential to scale over time also allows the development of some modules to start producing power while others are still developing. And of course, these SMRs do produce clean and firm power or heat, and so they will be attracting these potential industrial opportunities. And so how do we get there, and how do we increase this access? Again, I think de-risking this first-of-a-kind order book is really essential to demonstrating the learnings, not only to the customers, but also to potential investors and lenders. And in addition to that, NSI also wants to explore, again, the role of international institutions. So what are ways in which there can be construction support, licensing support, financial support to hopefully increase this access and in the places that need it most?
Thank you. And I want to pick up on a point that you mentioned, and also Jacob mentioned earlier, was this coal to nuclear transition. And how this is creating opportunities, not just from an economic perspective, but also in enabling employees within the coal industry to transition into the nuclear industry. So it's also creating opportunities for new jobs. And so as we look to potentially double or triple nuclear energy by 2050, workforce development becomes a significant part of the conversation. And so, Jeremy, maybe let's start at the international level from the IAEA's perspective. How are you supporting the training and development of new countries and their employees as they look to pursue nuclear energy?
Yeah, thanks. And this is so important. Capacity building in newcomer countries is extremely important to the implementation of safeguards because contrary to what many might think, the front line of safeguards is not the IAEA, it's the facility itself and it's the country. So the safeguard starts with the material accountancy being taken in a robust manner, in a correct manner, in a consistent manner at the facilities, reported consistently and regularly and on time through the state authority to the IAEA. So the agency invests heavily in capacity building exercises in newcomer states, and we do this in many ways. At the highest level, it's safeguards is one of the milestones issues, and so we are part of the INIR missions that go and assess the degree to which states are meeting the different milestones or are planning to meet the different milestones in developing a nuclear program. And then we assess where the state authority for safeguards is at that current state and what the plans are. And so you're getting that infrastructure in place. And then there's a small subset of state authorities that are part of what we call, well, it's a very intensive training multi-year training session that we call COMPASS, but it's COMPASS. I'm not sure what it stands for, but it's an intensive training. It's a good acronym. And it's an intensive training session to make sure the infrastructure is in place, and then you need to fill that infrastructure with a trained workforce. And we do that through a large training section in the Department of Safeguards, which also has various levels, including a very intensive multi-year process called the Safeguards Traineeship Program, where you bring nationals from a newcomer state, and they reside in Vienna, and they live and work here, and they learn safeguards from the inside, and they travel and see facilities, and they interact, and they write a thesis, and it's an intensive training exercise. And then we also have national and regional training programs that we will execute in the countries themselves. And so this is all done not just because it's a good idea, but because it's absolutely necessary that safeguards starts with robust state capabilities for reporting safeguards, which we then do the verification of. But it has to work on both ends. So it's not just enough to have new SMR technologies that are able to be efficiently safeguarded. You need to have SMR countries that are able to implement safeguards or help the IAEA implement safeguards. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Khalid, from Jordan's perspective, what steps are you taking to build local capacity, to ensure that you do have the workforce ready to deploy your first SMR?
So as mentioned, like the workforce development is really essential for any nuclear program, especially if it contains like power plant. So in Jordan actually we have started in 2008 actually, once the nuclear energy program has officially commenced. We have established the nuclear engineering program department at one of the universities in Jordan, and which is provide the nuclear engineering nuclear engineers workforce for future power plants. Actually, I am one of those graduates of this student, so I was on the second batch. So the nuclear program started when I was in high school, so that was okay. I will go to this department, and I started that nuclear engineering career for myself. And actually, we also have the Jordan Research Training Reactor, actually, which is mainly our machine for continuous supplying of professional workforce. And so actually we see the progress of our HRD program, because we have many of our colleagues that working with regional countries, especially for the UAE. So we have more than 20 nuclear engineers, Jordanian engineers from the nuclear engineering department of Jordan, that is of contributing to their power plant project. And we expect to continue the same. Of course, that we should consider more SMR related things safeguards, one of example, and trying to focus on our university education, our GRTR, research reactor, to be the main supply for professional engineers to Jordan SMR project.
Thank you. And with that, given the time, I'd actually like to open the floor to maybe one or two questions, if anyone has anything they'd like to ask. Sure, Anna?
Safety and security. I have volume. I have a question for whichever of our panelists are happy to answer. Really with environmental sustainability in mind, I wanted to know what discussions you have had with partners about spent fuel and radioactive waste. How do we make sure that host countries understand the infrastructure that they're going to need to have in order that the spent fuel and waste can be managed safely? Thank you.
I'm not sure if I can satisfy with you a good answer, but from an end user point of view, actually, the spent fuel, it's where is the hidden cost is. So we really try to of course, okay, we operated this great facility, whatever, so okay, what we do with cost, and this is really where the hidden cost comes in. So what we are trying to do, like for the case of Jordan at least, like we are interested in two lines of technology, like the light water-based SMRs and HTGR, like high temperature gas cooled reactor SMRs. Both they have different back-end fuel cycle requirements. One, they have different international experience or best practices with dealing with each part of this fuel. So what we are trying to do, like for now, actually, we try to first communicate directly with the vendors. What are those requirements that you will have? First, and second, that we go with to the IAEA actually to have some more consultation whether what we should expect. We should have like some expert opinion for each fuel cycle, for each technology fuel cycle. So this is basically what we are doing now, like communication with the vendors, having like an expert opinion on each one, for each line of technology, and basically this is what comes to my mind now.
Thank you.
So from a Polish perspective, we don't have an operating nuclear power plant. We do have a research reactor. We don't own the fuel, so the fuel once coming into our research reactor goes out to the country of origin. So we don't have to actually do anything with the fuel after that. So for our current development and our current situation, there is no issues because we solve them by discussing with the country of origin over the fuel. So that helps on one topic. But when we consider the future nuclear power plants, we already have a price tag that will help for the decommissioning fund in case when the operating plants will have to be decommissioned. So that's one thing. For the storage of nuclear waste, in Poland we have one repository for low and medium radioactive waste. We don't have a high radioactive waste storage facility, but it is a struggle to find one in Poland because there's maybe not enough information shared with the public in the places where there is the consideration of building those things. So this is, I wouldn't say yet urgent topic because the first units will be deployed in the next decade, but it starts to be more and more important, especially if we consider building not one nuclear power plant in Poland, but multiple sites, multiple technologies. So we have to keep that in mind, but it's not decided in Poland yet.
I'm just going to invoke the 3S here and segue over to safeguards, because when the message that we give is when you're planning to safely manage the waste, please include the fact that there's institutional controls from the safeguards people that you don't necessarily want to have applied to that waste in perpetuity. If it's spent fuel, it's going to be applied in perpetuity, and therein lies a lesson as well that people sometimes think it's not. When it goes to a geological repository, they think surely safeguards doesn't apply anymore because it's a half-kilometer down and the state can't get at it. Safeguards will still apply. So it'll be a certain kind of safeguards, but safeguards still applies as long as there's an IAEA. Or things like dry storage containers, if you're procuring them, it's always a good idea to specify the ability to safeguard them if you're in a country under safeguards. So where is the seal going to go? And if the supplier says what safeguards or what's a safeguard seal, then you need them to really become aware of that, because that is a serious issue where we are retrofitting seals to large volumes of waste in containers that haven't had safeguards taken into account. For decommissioning waste, radioactive waste, we don't want to be applying safeguards to that, but we will if the concentration of uranium and thorium or plutonium in that material, if there's contamination levels, is high enough that we can't terminate safeguards. So we would like to terminate safeguards. We don't want to have to do safeguards on barrels of waste. Certainly operators don't want us applying safeguards on barrels of waste, but we do apply safeguards on barrels of waste today because in the development of the RAD waste management campaign, nobody thought about the fact that there's uranium in their barrels, and it was under safeguards, and maybe it was found, but in any case, it's over a certain concentration. So we can terminate if it's below a certain concentration, but it's too late if it's already cemented and super compacted and in a barrel and distributed by the hundreds into a narrow trench. It's much better if we talk ahead of time. That's our message.
So for me, the regulators are the responsibility there, because it's necessary to have the regulation for the whole process to the use of the reactors, you know. And I think that the regulatory body needs to involve the operators in the whole process because they need to understand, the operators need to understand the safety and the security recommendation and the security recommendation associated with the use of the reactors. So the regulators have a part of responsibility there.
Thank you. So we've covered a lot of ground today, from the technical, the financial, to the regulatory challenges, but also to the immense opportunities that SMRs and microreactors present in our journey towards a net zero future. So as we move towards the reception this evening, I'd encourage all of you to continue these conversations amongst yourselves and with the panelists and reflect on how we can collaborate not just across sectors and countries, but also across generations to ensure these technologies contribute to a more sustainable world. So I'd like to thank the U.S. National Nuclear Security Administration for sponsoring this evening's event, and also the IAEA Department of Nuclear Security and Nuclear Energy. Please join us in E-Space 0 for the reception. And again, thank you to all of our panelists.